The cold hit me first. Not the cold of space, not the cold of metal, but the cold of waking up after a very long time, with the knowledge that everything you were sleeping for has finally arrived. My name is Cale Voss. I am 31 years old, and I have been alive for 4,006 years. I pulled the cryoseal from my neck before the automated system could finish its cycle. The gel on my skin was still warm. Around me, in the long chamber that ran the spine of the Ark ship, 400 other pods were hissing open in sequence. I did not wait for them. I walked barefoot to the forward observation port and pressed my hand against the glass. There it was, council space. Real, actual, living council space. Billions of stars that had looked down on the erasure of my world. I had studied charts of this region since I was 6 years old. I had memorized every patrol lane, every signal relay, every deep space buoy the Threnian Collective had placed out here. And now I was looking at it with my own eyes, and my heart was beating so steadily it frightened me. My second in command, Lieutenant Nora Aldwell, was already at her station when I reached the bridge. She was 28, born on the 4th Ark ship, and she had never once in her life complained about anything. She looked up from her console. "Fleet status," I said. "All 47 Arks have completed transit. No detection signals. Council patrol grid is running its standard 12-hour sweep cycle. We have a 9-minute gap before the next pass." "Good. Begin passive scan. I want full sensor data on every vessel within 2 light years." She nodded and turned back to her screens. I sat in the command chair and looked at the stars and thought about my grandfather. His name had been Owen Voss. He was the original fleet admiral, the man who had organized the escape of those first 47 ships in the final hours before the stellar-side weapon detonated in our solar system. He had been 44 years old when Earth was erased. He had lived to be 119, most of it spent in cryosleep, spending his waking years building the plan, refining the plan, passing the plan to his children and his children's children like a sacred inheritance. He had died 300 years ago, but not before recording his final orders into a sealed holographic file that was programmed to play for the fleet admiral upon arrival in council space. The file had been passed from admiral to admiral, unopened, for 3 centuries. I opened it now. His face appeared in the air above my console. He looked tired in the way that very determined people look tired, like the exhaustion was something he had chosen to carry rather than something that had been forced on him. His hair was white. His hands, folded on the desk in front of him, were steady. "Cale," he said. He had never met me. He had recorded this message knowing it would be addressed to whoever sat in this chair, and he had used the name of the Admiral's line as a placeholder, and by coincidence or destiny, it had become my actual name. "If you are watching this, then we made it. All those years, all those arcs, all those cold and silent decades, we made it." He paused. He looked down at his hands. "I want to tell you something that no one in the fleet is going to tell you, because they are all going to be ready for war, and the last thing soldiers want to hear before a war is caution. So I will say it now, from 300 years in your past, and you can do with it what you will. Do not become them. Do not let what they did to us become the thing that defines us. Use every weapon we have built. Take back everything they took. Make them answer for what they did. But remember why we survived. We survived because we were human. Hold on to that." The hologram ended. I sat with it for a long time. Then I stood up and went back to work, because there was a great deal of it left to do. The fleet numbered 4,012 warships. They were not the largest ships in the galaxy, not by a significant margin. The Threnian Collective flew vessels the size of small moons, great slow things bristling with weapons that could split a planet at its core. Our ships were smaller, faster, and built around a principle that 4,000 years of exile had taught us above all else: adaptation. We had taken every piece of council technology we had managed to steal or reverse engineer across 4 millennia and improved it. Our shield systems were 3 generations ahead of anything the council had deployed. Our drives could punch through interference fields that would stop a Threnian fleet cold. Our weapons were quiet and precise in the way that weapons built by people with a very specific purpose tend to be. We were not coming here to fight a war of attrition. We were coming here to end something. Navigator Calvin Price, a tall and quiet man who had the unusual talent of being able to read a star chart the way other people read a sentence, looked up from his station. "Admiral, I am getting a faint signal from the deep relay buoy at Grid 7. Council standard encryption. It is a routine status ping. Is it flagging us?" "No, sir. We are invisible to it." "Good. And keep monitoring." Around me, the bridge crew moved with the calm efficiency of people who had been trained for this their entire lives. Gwen Harlow at Communications, 24 years old and already one of the finest signal analysts in the fleet, was cross-referencing the Council's public broadcast frequencies against our intelligence files. Tactical Officer Ben Naylor was running probability models on the patrol routes. Medical Officer Dr. Lena Shore was ensuring that the rest of the 400 crew in the forward section completed their cryo-recovery protocols without issue. These were my people. Not just my crew. My people. The children of arc ships and dead moons and silent decades spent in the dark, learning and waiting, and becoming something the Council had never imagined when it signed the order to erase us. I pulled up the Council's public records database, which we had been quietly tapping for the last 800 years through a network of relay drones placed at the edges of their signal range. I went to the extinction registry. It was a long file. Species came and went in a galaxy this old. Most of them were listed with detailed historical entries, with the dates of their final confirmed biological signals and notes on their cultural contributions. Earth was listed between the Krellian swarm, an insect species that had gone extinct due to solar collapse, and the dust moths, a peaceful civilization that had faded quietly after their home system's resources ran dry. Our entry was 4 lines long. It listed our star, which they had renamed after removing our designation from the charts. It listed the date of erasure. It listed the vote count as 31 in favor, 0 against. And it listed the reason in a single bureaucratic phrase: Galactic security risk, expansion pattern deemed unregulable. 4 lines, 4,000 years of human history, and they had given us 4 lines. Nora appeared at my shoulder. She had read the entry before. Everyone in the fleet had. But she looked at it now with the expression she always wore when confronting something she had long since processed and accepted. Quiet, clear, without the trembling heat of fresh grief. That was what 4,000 years of preparation did to anger. It did not make it smaller. It made it harder, colder, and far more useful. "We are all awake," she said. "All 47 ships. 14 billion people, Admiral. Every single one of them." I closed the registry file. "Then let's begin," I said. The first thing we did was nothing. We held position at the edge of Council space for 72 hours. And we watched. We listened. We mapped. We cross-referenced every piece of intelligence we had with what our sensors were showing us in real time. We identified the locations of the 31 species that had voted for Earth's erasure. We mapped their homeworlds, their trade routes, their military installations, their communication networks, their council seats. We found that 10 of the original 31 species had expanded significantly in the 4,000 years since our erasure. 3 of them had colonized systems that had once been within Earth's own expansion corridor, the region our people had been exploring and settling in the years before the vote. They had moved into our unfinished work and called it their own. We found that the Stellar Side weapon, the device built by the Threnian Collective and deployed against our sun, had been used twice more since our erasure, once against a small pre-spaceflight civilization on a planet called Vareth 4, which the Council had deemed too biologically aggressive to be allowed to develop, once against an asteroid mining culture that had refused to join the Council's resource-sharing framework and had been classified as a rogue economic entity. In both cases, the vote had been 31-0. In both cases, the deed had been done in the name of galactic security. They had built a habit of it. That was the detail that changed everything for me. Not the original crime against humanity, which I had known about my entire life, but the knowledge that in 4,000 years they had learned nothing, regretted nothing, reconsidered nothing. They had simply moved on and done it again. I called all 47 ship captains to a fleet-wide briefing. Their faces filled the screen in rows. I knew all of them by name, by background, by the particular way each of them carried the same inheritance I carried. In 3 weeks, I said, we will reveal ourselves. Not yet. First, I need to know everything. I need to know this place as well as I know our own ships. When we speak, and we will speak loudly, there will be no room for error. Captain Elise Drummond of the 7th Ark, a woman with 20 years of deep space command, and a stillness about her that I had always admired, leaned forward slightly. And when we speak, Admiral, what exactly are we saying? I thought about my grandfather's face. I thought about 4 lines in an extinction registry. We are saying, I told her, that the registry needs to be updated. The briefing ended. The fleet held its position in the dark. 47 ships, 4,000 more behind them, 14 billion people breathing quietly in the cold between the stars, waiting for the moment that 4,000 years of waiting had been building toward. I went back to the observation port. I pressed my hand against the glass again. The stars looked exactly the same as they had when I first woke up, but something about them felt different now. They felt like ours. I stayed there for a long time. Then I went to get some sleep, because I was going to need it. The station was called Voraxis, and it was beautiful in the way that something built entirely around profit tends to be. Every surface was polished. Every corridor was wide and well lit, and filled with the species of 31 council worlds going about the business of a galaxy that had been at peace, or what it called peace, for 4,000 years. The central atrium rose 8 levels, and was crossed by suspended walkways where traders and diplomats and couriers moved in the easy rhythm of people who had never once considered that the universe might have something coming for them. I walked through it wearing the face of someone who belonged there. The identity we were using was Threnian Merchant, lower tier, registered to a small cargo operation out of the Velos system. The biometric overlay was the finest work our intelligence division had produced in 3 decades of refinement. It covered 4 of us, myself, Nora, our intelligence analyst Cade Morton, and our communications specialist Gwen Harlow, who had insisted on coming despite being 24 and despite my initial reluctance, because she was the only person in the fleet who could read Threnian encrypted signal patterns in real time, with her eyes and her instincts, rather than a decryption engine. Cade Morton was 33, careful, methodical, and possessed of a memory so precise that he had once recited, from recall, the complete navigational charts of 14 council systems during a briefing without a single error. He had been training for an infiltration like this since he was 16. He walked beside me now with the loose, relaxed gait of a man on a routine supply run, and I knew that behind his calm eyes, he was cataloging everything he saw. Food court is on level 3, Gwen said quietly, through the intra-team channel embedded in our collar hardware. High traffic, good ambient noise cover. Threnian Council Relay Terminal is on the eastern wall. Public access, used by low-clearance registered merchants for standard documentation updates. And the sealed archive terminal? I said. Level 6, restricted to Council administrative staff and registered diplomatic couriers. We have the courier credentials. They will hold for approximately 4 hours before the authentication cycle refreshes. Then we have 4 hours. Let's not waste them. We split. Nora and Gwen went to the food court on level 3 to establish our cover presence and monitor station communications traffic. Cade and I took the lift to level 6. The lift was quiet. There was a Velocian trade representative in it with us, a tall creature with smooth gray skin and large, dark eyes that reflected light in a way that was slightly unsettling. It looked at us with polite disinterest and went back to reviewing a data tablet. I looked at my own reflection in the polished door of the lift and saw a Threnian merchant, middle-aged by their standards, traveling for ordinary reasons in an ordinary place. The disguise was very good, but it was not the disguise I was thinking about. I was thinking about the larger disguise, the one humanity had worn for 4,000 years. The disguise of being gone, of being extinct, of being 4 lines in a registry and a faded entry in a galactic history that no one bothered to read anymore. Level 6 was quieter than the atrium, The floors here were a darker material, less decorative, more functional. Council administrative staff moved between offices with the particular energy of people who were important in a small but consistent way. There were 2 security checkpoints. We passed both of them with the courier credentials and the biometric overlays and the unhurried confidence of people who went through security checkpoints regularly and found them tedious. The archive terminal room was small. 6 stations, 3 occupied by council clerks who were processing routine documentation. Kate and I took 2 adjacent stations near the far wall and logged in. What I was looking for had been the objective of our intelligence division for 200 years. Not battle plans, not weapons schematics. Something older and more important. The original sealed vote record from the council session 4,000 years ago in which 31 species had agreed, in documented and legally binding terms, to the erasure of Earth and every human being in its system. We had fragments of it. We had the official public announcement, which mentioned the vote count but not the individual votes. We had secondary records from several council species' own archives that confirmed their participation, but we did not have the primary document. The one with the names, the individual votes, the recorded statements of justification, the signatures of every council leader who had sat in that chamber and raised their hand for our erasure. That document was here. We had traced its location 3 years ago through a chain of archival cross-references that Cade Morton had spent the better part of a decade following. It was stored in the Historical Records Division of the Council's Administrative Archive, classified at a level that suggested it was considered sensitive even 4,000 years later, which told me that somewhere in that chamber, there were species who understood, on some level, that what they had done was not something they wanted widely discussed. Found it, Cade said. His voice was completely level. He might have been announcing that he had located a supply invoice. I leaned slightly toward his screen. The file was there. Original Council Record 7741 erasure. Dated 4,003 years ago. Sealed. Encrypted with a council administrative key that we had obtained the structure of through 8 years of careful signals intelligence. Cade ran the decryption. It took 11 seconds. The file opened. I read it. I am not going to describe precisely what I felt reading it, partly because this account is meant to be a record of events rather than a personal document, and partly because I am not sure I have the right words for it. I will say this. Seeing a thing described in fragments and knowing it happened is very different from reading the actual words of the people who decided to do it, in their own voice, in the measured and bureaucratic language of a governing body that genuinely believed it was making the correct decision. 31 species, 31 votes in favor, every one of them recorded, every one of them with a brief statement of justification attached, filed by the representative who had cast the vote. The Threnian representative's justification was the longest. It ran to 6 paragraphs and used phrases like long-term galactic stability and the imperative of regulated expansion and the difficult but necessary calculus of species-level threat assessment. It read like the work of someone who had thought about this very carefully and arrived at a conclusion they found entirely reasonable. There was a single additional entry at the bottom of the vote record that was not part of the official tally. It was marked as a dissenting procedural note, which was a form that allowed council members to register a legal objection without changing the vote outcome. It had been filed by 2 species, the Eloan Collective and the Sari Confederation. Both had voted in favor because their representatives had received private communications before the session, indicating that a vote against would result in trade sanctions. The dissenting note said only that the representatives wished it recorded that their votes did not reflect the genuine position of their governments, and that they believed the action was being taken without sufficient evidence of the stated threat. 2 species had been forced to vote for our erasure, and they had found a way to say so, quietly, in the one place they thought no one would ever look. I copied the entire file. Every vote, every statement, every word. Cade transferred it to our relay hardware in the same motion he used to close the terminal window. Smooth and practiced. No pause. No hesitation. We were logged out and walking back toward the lift within 90 seconds of the file opening. In the lift, on the way back down, The same Velocian trade representative was still there. It glanced at us again. Then it looked slightly more carefully. I watched its eyes move to my hands, then to my face, then to a small point below my left ear where, presumably, the biometric overlay had a seam that was detectable to Velocian sensory organs under close examination. It opened its mouth. "You have been at the archive terminal," it said. Not an accusation. More of an observation, delivered with the careful tone of a creature that had not yet decided what to do with what it had noticed. I met its eyes. "Supply chain documentation," I said. "The Velo's cross-tariff update has created a great deal of extra paperwork." It looked at me for another moment. Then it nodded, slowly, and went back to its data tablet. The lift reached level 3. We stepped out. We did not walk faster than we had walked before. Gwen and Nora were at a table in the food court, 2 cups of something warm between them, looking exactly like 2 merchants with time to spare before their next departure window. Gwen looked up when she saw us and raised her eyebrows a fraction. I sat down. I picked up one of the warm cups. I took a slow drink, because everything about the next 10 minutes needed to look like nothing at all. "We have it," I said. Nora said nothing. Gwen said nothing. Cade sat down and put his hands flat on the table. After a moment, Nora said, "All of it?" "All of it. 31 votes, every statement, 2 coerced dissents that were never made public. Everything." Gwen looked down at her cup. "So they all knew exactly what they were doing." "Yes. And they did it anyway." "Yes." Another moment of silence. Around us, the station moved in its ordinary rhythms. Species from 31 worlds buying and selling and talking and moving through a universe that, as of right now, was still exactly what they thought it was. In approximately 3 weeks, it was going to be something very different. We finished our drinks. We walked back to our docked merchant vessel at a completely unremarkable pace. We undocked with a standard departure filing. We cleared the station's sensor perimeter and went to low drive, traveling as any Threnian merchant would travel, unhurried and unremarkable, for 4 hours. Then I opened a tight beam channel to the fleet. "All captains," I said, "stand by for a file transfer. When you receive it, you will want to read it carefully. Then I want you to send a copy to every person in your crew." I paused. 14 billion people have been waiting 4,000 years to know exactly who made the decision that took their world. Now they will know. I transmitted the file. For a long moment the channel was completely silent. Then Captain Elise Drummond's voice came back, very quiet, very steady. "We are ready, Admiral." "I know," I said. "I know you are." I closed the channel and set a course for the rally point. Behind me, 4,000 warships were waiting in the dark, and in each of them, people were reading 31 names for the very first time, and the silence between the stars had never felt so full of something about to happen. I thought about the Velocian on the lift. I thought about the moment it had looked at me, and almost, but not quite, understood what it was seeing. 3 weeks. That was how long they had left. I hoped they would use the time well. There is a particular kind of silence that happens when something very large appears where nothing was before. I have read accounts of it from the history files we carried across 4,000 years of exile. Sailors in Earth's ancient maritime age described it when they saw a fleet of enemy ships appear from fog. Soldiers described it when they stood on a hill and watched a force they had not expected crest the horizon. It is not the silence of calm. It is the silence of a mind stopping itself completely for 1 full second, because the information arriving in the eyes is too large for ordinary processing. I watched that silence happen across 31 worlds simultaneously. We had spent 3 weeks preparing for this moment, down to the final detail. The approach vectors were designed so that all 4,012 ships decloaked at the same instant, each positioned at the precise distance from each Council homeworld and major installation that would ensure maximum sensor coverage. Not so close that it read as immediate aggression. Close enough that there was absolutely no ambiguity about what was happening. They saw us all at once. I was on the bridge of the lead arc when our ship dropped its cloak. The stars did not change. The void did not change. We simply became visible, and across the galaxy, In 31 systems, Council vessels and stations and defense networks received a sensor return they had no category for. 4,000 human warships, decloaking from nothing, from space that had been empty. I let them look for 60 seconds. Then I opened the broad-spectrum channel. This is Admiral Cale Voss of the Remnant Fleet, commanding force of the human species. I am speaking on all frequencies simultaneously, in all known Council languages, and this message is being relayed through every signal network within range. We are transmitting our fleet identification, our point of origin, and our authorization documentation. We are human. We are 4,000 years old in exile, and we have come home. I paused. We are not here to ask permission. We are not here to negotiate our right to exist. We are here because this space belongs to us as much as it belongs to anyone, and because 4,000 years ago, 31 member species of this council decided that humanity should be removed from the universe. We have spent every one of those 4,000 years preparing our response. Another pause. We are targeting nothing at this time. No weapon systems are active. We will hold position for 48 hours. Use that time to evacuate any civilians from military or administrative installations within our sensor range. We are not interested in people who had nothing to do with a decision made before they were born. We are interested in the council. We are interested in the record. And we are interested in what happens next. I closed the channel. Nora Aldwell, beside me, was watching the response signals flooding our communication array. Ships that had been on routine patrol were changing course. Defense stations were powering up. Across the Council's internal network, which we were monitoring through the relay infrastructure we had spent 2 centuries quietly embedding in their signal grid, emergency sessions were being called. Fleet commanders were receiving alerts. Political representatives were being pulled from meetings. They are trying to calculate our numbers, Cade Morton reported from the intelligence station. Their initial sensor return is giving them an incomplete picture. The deep field ships are still reading as background noise. Good. Let them discover us gradually. Because what they were seeing at first was not the full fleet. What they were seeing was the 400 ships that had decloaked in the most visible positions, the ones closest to major installations, the ones that were unmistakable. The other 3,600 were still positioned in the outer reaches, detectable now if you knew what to look for, but not immediately obvious in the chaos of a galaxy-wide sensor alert. The Council would spend the next few hours trying to assess what they were facing, and each hour they would discover that the answer was larger than the hour before. Ben Naylor at the tactical station looked up. Admiral, the Threnian Collective is scrambling a fast response fleet. 60 vessels, likely moving toward Thren Prime's defensive perimeter. Thren Prime, the homeworld of the species that had built the stellar-side weapon. The species whose representative had written 6 paragraphs of careful justification for the erasure of humanity 4,000 years ago. I had chosen Thren Prime as the demonstration point, not for destruction, for something more precise. Match their fleet movements, I said. Keep our ships at a consistent distance. Do not advance. Do not retreat. Let them see that we are not reacting to them. Because that was the first lesson we needed to teach. We were not reacting to anyone. We were acting according to a plan we had made, and their responses were simply information we were cataloging for later use. The Threnian fast response fleet arrived at their defensive perimeter and formed up. 60 ships. They were good ships by Council standards. Large, well-armed, built by a species that had been the galaxy's premier military power for 4,000 years. Their commander, a fleet chief whose name our intelligence files identified as Sorath of the Collective, opened a channel to us. Unidentified fleet. You have entered Council space without authorization. Stand down and prepare for inspection, or be treated as a hostile incursion. I opened a channel back. Fleet Chief Sorath. We have transmitted our identification already. We are the remnant fleet of the human species. We entered this space without requesting authorization, because we do not require authorization from a body that voted to erase us. I am giving you the same 48 hours I am giving the rest of the Council to ensure your civilian population is clear of military infrastructure. After that, we will be discussing terms. I suggest you begin the evacuation. The channel stayed open for a moment, then Sorath's voice came back, and there was something in it that was not quite the authority I had heard in the first transmission. Something slightly recalibrated. "You claim to be human," he said. "Humans are extinct." "Your registry is incorrect," I said. "We are updating it now." I closed the channel. Across the fleet, ships were holding their positions with complete discipline. 47 ARC ships and 3,965 warships, each one crewed by people who had grown up knowing this day was coming, who had trained for every contingency we could imagine, who were now executing a plan with the calm precision of a species that had spent 4,000 years with nothing to do but prepare. The 48 hours passed. The Threnian collective civilian population, we monitored it carefully, did move from the orbital stations and the military platforms. They were not stupid. They could see the numbers on their sensors, and the numbers were not comfortable reading. When the 48th hour arrived, I gave my next order. Engage the Thren Prime infrastructure targets. Precision only. Zero civilian contact. Begin with the orbital defense grid. What happened next took 4 hours. Our ships did not strike the planet. They did not strike any vessel that was not actively targeting us. What they struck, with a deliberate and surgical accuracy that I think surprised the Threnian commanders even more than the size of our fleet, was everything that made Thren Prime's military capacity function from orbit. The defense grid, the fleet repair stations, the communications relay network, the long-range sensor array that fed their military intelligence division. We took all of it apart. The Threnian fast response fleet engaged us. They fought well. I want to say that clearly, because what happened to them was not the result of cowardice or incompetence. They fought the way a force fights when it believes in what it is defending, and has no way of knowing that the enemy it is facing has spent 4,000 years specifically preparing for this exact engagement. Their weapons hit our shields, and our shields held in ways that their tactical models could not account for. Our return fire was precise and careful, and aimed at systems rather than crews wherever possible. Within 90 minutes, 31 of their 60 ships were disabled rather than destroyed. The remaining 29 pulled back to a holding distance and stopped firing. Sorath opened a channel again. This time, the authority was entirely gone. "What do you want?" he said. "Right now?" I said. "I want you to stay where you are and watch what I do next." I opened the broad-spectrum channel again, the one that went to every frequency and range, relayed through our embedded network to every corner of Council space. "People of the Galactic Council," I said, "what you have seen in the last 48 hours is not an attack. It is a demonstration. We have removed the Threnian Collective's orbital military capacity. We have not touched their surface. We have not targeted civilians. We have not destroyed a single vessel that was not actively firing on us. Everything we have done has been proportional to a single, specific purpose." I paused. "We are also transmitting, right now, on this same frequency, a document. It is the original sealed vote record of Council Session 7741, dated 4,003 years ago. It contains the individual votes and the recorded statements of justification for every species that voted to erase the human species from this galaxy. Every name, every word, in their own language, in the language of every species in this transmission range, translated precisely. Read it, all of you, because what happened to us can happen to anyone this council decides is inconvenient. It happened to Vareth 4. It happened to the asteroid mining culture you erased 2,000 years ago. And it will happen again, unless the people of this galaxy understand what is being done in their name. I closed the channel. For a while, nothing happened. Then, slowly, the signals started coming in. Not from military vessels, from civilian networks, from the open frequencies that ordinary people on 31 worlds used to talk to each other. The vote record was spreading. It was being read, shared, discussed, reacted to. I had not expected silence from the Council's population. I had expected what was now beginning, the discovery, for millions of ordinary beings who had never known, or had forgotten, or had chosen not to ask, that their governments had once voted to erase an entire species, and had done it again, and had never, in 4,000 years, mentioned it to anyone. Nora came to stand beside me. She was looking at the signal display, watching the civilian traffic spike as the document moved through the networks. "It is working," she said. "It is only the beginning," I said. Captain Elise Drummond's voice came through on the fleet channel. "Admiral, we are receiving a council-wide emergency broadcast. The Grand Council is calling a full session. They are requesting that we send a representative." I stood up. "Tell them we will attend," I said. "But they should set a human chair at the table. We will not stand." I walked to the window and looked at Thren Prime below us. A planet of billions. A world that had built the weapon that killed our sun. Still intact. Still turning. I had no desire to change that, and I thought my grandfather would have approved of that decision, if not for the reason anyone watching might have assumed. I left it intact not because I was merciful. I left it intact because it was more powerful for them to live with the knowledge of what was coming than to have it end quickly. They needed to sit with the awareness that we had the capacity to do far more than we had done, and that the reason we had not was a choice we were making, not a limit we were working within. That was a lesson that would outlast any battle. The fleet held position, the council met, and for the first time in 4,000 years, the galaxy was going to have to make room for humanity at the table. We were not asking for a seat. We were taking one. I had been in the council grand chamber for 11 minutes before anyone spoke to me directly. That was not an accident. The chamber was designed around a specific kind of power, the kind that announces itself through architecture and silence, and the slow, deliberate movements of species that have been governing a galaxy for a very long time. The ceiling was high. The central table was long. The seats of the 31-member species were arranged in a precise crescent, each one elevated slightly higher than the floor where I stood, so that whoever addressed the council was always, by design, looking slightly upward. I had studied the chamber's layout for 20 years. When I entered, I walked past the speaker's position in the center of the floor. I walked to the far end of the crescent, to the one chair that was empty, the one that had been left empty since the original human council seat had been removed 4,000 years ago. Someone had placed a temporary stand there, presumably to fill the visual gap. I moved the stand aside. I set it against the wall. I sat in the space where the human chair had been. Nobody tried to stop me. I folded my hands on the table and looked at the 31 delegations and waited. The council presiding elder was a Kelhari, a species with pale, layered skin and very large, still eyes. She had held the position for 60 years by their calendar, which made her experienced enough to know that the situation she was currently in had no precedent and almost no applicable protocol. She looked at me for a long moment, and then she said, in the common trading language that all species in council space shared, "You are Admiral Voss." "I am," I said. "You have brought 4,000 warships into council space." "More than 4,000, I said. "But yes." Another silence. "You have removed the Threnian Collective's orbital defense capacity." "I have." "And you have broadcast the contents of a sealed council record to every frequency in this region of space." "I have done that as well." She folded her hands on the surface in front of her, mirroring my posture exactly, which I thought was either deliberate or unconscious, and either way was interesting. "What is it that you want, Admiral Voss?" I looked around the table. 31 species, most of them represented by their senior diplomatic officials, some by their heads of government. Some of them were watching me with expressions I could read well enough through 4,000 years of recorded cultural study. Fear in some, calculation in others. In a few, something that looked almost like shame. And those were the ones I paid the most careful attention to. Because shame in a political body is either a tool or a liability depending on how it is handled. "Before I tell you what I want," I said, "I want to address something that several of your delegations have already raised in pre-session communications, which we were, naturally, monitoring. The argument that the action taken against humanity 4,000 years ago was legal under the council statutes of that time." I paused. I looked at the delegation from the Threnian Collective directly. Their representative, A senior official named Keth met my gaze and held it. Legality and justice are not the same thing, I said. Your statutes permitted the erasure of a species. Your statutes also, at that same time, permitted indentured labor contracts that the Council has since abolished because it recognized them as inhumane. Your statutes permitted species reclassification procedures that stripped entire civilizations of their Council standing based on biological criteria that were later found to be fabricated. The fact that something was legal under a given framework does not mean it was right. It does not mean it will go unanswered. And it does not mean that the parties responsible bear no accountability simply because the framework has since been updated. Keth opened his mouth. I am not finished, I said. He closed it. You have had 4,000 years in which any member of this body could have chosen to revisit that decision, to acknowledge what was done, to make some attempt at redress. You had 4,000 years in which the dissenting votes of the Elohim Collective and the Sari Confederation, which were cast under documented coercion, could have been acknowledged and addressed. You did none of those things. You sealed the record. You removed our star from your charts. You erased our entry from the extinction registry with 4 lines, and then you used the same weapon twice more. The chamber was very quiet. 2 more species, I said. Vareth 4, the Orath mining culture, gone, because this council decided they were inconvenient. How many of the species in this room know about Vareth 4? How many of your citizens do? I waited. No one responded. That is what I thought. I sat back slightly. Here is what I want, I said. First, a permanent human seat on this council, with the same rights, the same voting power, and the same standing as every other member species. Not a provisional seat, not an observer status, an equal seat. Second, the complete and permanent dismantling of the Stellar-Side weapon program and all related research, overseen by a joint inspection team that includes human representatives, with public reporting to every member species. Third, the formal acknowledgement, in the Council's public record, of what was done to humanity, to Vareth 4, and to the Orath culture, with the full vote records released to the public archives of every member species. Fourth, the restoration of our territorial designation in all Council charts, navigation systems, and records, including the renaming of our star back to its original human designation. Fifth, the allocation of 1 habitable system within the territory that was taken from our expansion corridor 4,000 years ago, for use as a permanent human homeworld. I stopped. The chamber remained silent for several seconds. Then the Threnian representative, Keth, said, You are asking for recognition of war crimes committed by this body. I am asking for the truth to be public, I said. If you believe the truth constitutes a war crime, that is a conclusion you have reached yourself. The species responsible for those decisions are long dead. The species responsible benefit from them to this day, I said. The territory taken from our expansion corridor is still occupied by 3 Threnian colony systems. The resource extraction that began in our abandoned development zones still feeds collective industry. The dead make decisions. The living enjoy the results. Keth looked down. I had expected the Threnian representative to be the most difficult voice in the room. What I had not fully anticipated was where my next challenge would come from. It came from within my own people. My earpiece carried the fleet channel at a low level throughout the session. 2 hours into the discussion, Captain Rowan Beckett of the 19th Ark ship, a man I respected deeply and had known since my childhood, sent a direct communication flagged as urgent. KL, he said. I had told all captains they could use my name in direct communications. We have a situation. I kept my expression completely neutral and continued to follow the discussion at the table while I listened. 7 ship captains have submitted a joint formal request. They want authority to begin strikes on the 3 homeworlds belonging to the species that voted strongest for the erasure: Thren Prime, Velos, and the Kethian home system. They believe the Council is going to delay and deflect, and that we will end these talks with words and no real change. I breathed slowly. Hold, I said quietly. Tell them to hold and to trust the process. They are not sure the process works, Admiral. Neither am I said. But it is the process we are running. Hold. The 7 captains were not wrong in their fear. I had the same fear. 4,000 years of patience did not make you immune to the concern that a table of diplomats would find a way to replace genuine accountability with carefully worded gestures. I had seen it in the historical record often enough. The powerful were very good at acknowledging wrongdoing in language that managed to say everything without costing anything. But I had something those 7 captains were not seeing from their position in the outer fleet. I was watching the delegations of the Eloan Collective and the Sari Confederation, the 2 species whose representatives had filed the coerced dissenting note 4,000 years ago. Both of them had been quiet throughout the session, but they were quiet in a different way from the others. They were listening carefully, and the senior Eloan delegate, a small, precise individual named Dava Wen, had passed a written note to the presiding elder approximately 40 minutes into the session. I did not know what was in that note. 2 hours later, I found out. The presiding elder called a recess. She asked me to remain. When the other delegations left the chamber, she came down from her elevated seat and sat across the table from me, which was the first time in the session that any council representative had been at the same physical level as me in this room. The Eloan and Sari delegations have made a formal motion, she said. They are calling for a closed emergency vote on whether to accept your terms as a framework for negotiation. Not acceptance, I said. A framework. It is a beginning, she said. It is, I said. And beginnings matter. She looked at me for a moment. You are not what I expected, she said. When we received your first transmission, there were many in this body who expected rage, demands for destruction, something that could be answered with a military response and categorized as an attack. I know, I said. The broadcast of the vote record changed the situation considerably, she said. There are significant civilian reactions on multiple worlds. Our member species governments are receiving pressure from their own populations. I know that too, I said. She tilted her head slightly. You planned for that. We had 4,000 years, I said. We planned for most things. The recess ended. The delegations returned. The presiding elder called the vote. I sat quietly and watched. And then, from 3 systems away, my earpiece crackled. Admiral. It was Ben Naylor, my tactical officer back on the lead arc. I am reading a fleet departure from the Velos system. 22 ships, Kethian design, but flying Velocian registration. They are moving on an intercept course toward our outer fleet perimeter. The session was still running. I could not leave. Nora, I said on the private channel. I see it, she said. She was on the bridge. They are running quiet, but our deep sensors have them. They will reach the outer perimeter in approximately 4 hours. Wake up the outer fleet, I said. Passive tracking only. Do not engage. Do not move. Understood. I looked at the table. The vote was proceeding. 22 ships from a splinter faction of 3 species, moving under false registration, coming to strike at us while their governments sat in this chamber pretending to negotiate. I let them come. The 48 of the session passed. The emergency vote was taken. The result was 14 in favor of accepting my terms as a negotiating framework, 12 against, and 5 abstentions. A majority, but not the consensus the council preferred for major decisions. The presiding elder announced the result and told me negotiations would begin formally within 72 hours. I thanked her, stood, and walked out of the chamber. The moment I was clear of the station's formal zones and in a secured communication corridor, I contacted the bridge. Position? The 22 ships are holding at the outer edge of our perimeter, Nora said. They have been there for 90 minutes. They are not moving. I think they are waiting for a signal. From the chamber? That would be my assessment. I thought about that. A splinter faction had sent 22 ships under false registration to strike at us, while their government representatives were in negotiations. Not a rogue action by rogue commanders. A coordinated strategy. The 3 species involved, 2 of whom I had already identified from the registration traces, were the ones whose vote statements in the 4,000-year-old record had been most aggressive, most certain, most contemptuous of humanity's right to exist. They had not changed. Let them have their signal, I said. Let them commit. Kale, Nora said carefully, if we let them fire the first shots, then everything that follows is documented as self-defense, I said, and their governments, who are currently sitting in a chamber pretending to negotiate in good faith, will have no political ground to stand on. A pause. All right, she said, waiting. I walked back toward the transport bay. I had a shuttle waiting to take me back to the fleet. I was halfway there when the earpiece crackled again. They are moving, Ben Naylor said. All 22. Weapons going hot. All outer fleet units, I said. You are authorized to respond. Precision only. Disable where possible. No civilian contact. What happened next took 53 minutes. I watched the engagement data on a tablet in the shuttle as we flew back to the lead arc. The 22 ships engaged the outer perimeter of our fleet and were met by 340 human warships that had been waiting, holding position, running completely dark, for 4 hours. The mathematics were not close. By the time I reached the bridge, it was over. 22 ships, 16 disabled. 4 surrendered. 2 had attempted to run and had been stopped by drive system strikes. 0 crew losses among our forces. Moderate casualties among the attacking ships, primarily because they had made the decision to fire rather than to stop when our forces made their advantage clear. I looked at the engagement record. I looked at the registration data confirming which 3 species had supplied and crewed those ships. I looked at the transmission logs showing the signal that had been sent from a council administrative relay station 17 minutes into the session, before the vote, when the 3 species delegations had presumably realized the vote might not go their way. Then I got back on the shuttle. I went back to Axiom Station. I walked back into the council grand chamber without announcement. Several delegations were still present, filing procedural responses to the vote result. The presiding elder looked up from a conversation with 2 aides. I placed a data slate on the table in front of her, the engagement record, the registration data, the transmission log. The negotiations will proceed, I said, but you should be aware that 3 of your member species attempted a covert military strike on our fleet during this session. I am placing the documentation of that action into the public record. I looked at the 3 relevant delegations. Their representatives had gone very still. Your ships are disabled and being held by our fleet, I said. Their crews are unharmed. We are not holding them as prisoners. They will be returned to you. Consider it a demonstration of the kind of restraint we expect to be reciprocated going forward. I looked at the full chamber. I have been very patient today, I said. My people have been patient for 4,000 years. I want to be clear that patience is a choice we are making, not a quality we are limited to. We are choosing it because the outcome we want is not destruction. It is justice. Those are different things, and we know exactly which one we are here for. I picked up the data slate. 72 hours, I said. I will be back. I walked out. In the corridor, away from the chamber, I allowed myself one moment of something that was not quite relief, not quite satisfaction, but was in the vicinity of both. The kind of feeling you get when a very long and difficult thing has gone the way it needed to go. Not perfectly, not easily, but correctly. My grandfather had told me to hold on to being human. I was beginning to understand, more clearly than ever before, what he had meant. I stood at the observation port of the lead arc and looked down at New Terra for a long time before I said anything to anyone. It had been 14 days since the council session. The formal negotiations had lasted 9 of those days, during which I had spent more hours at a conference table than I had in the previous 5 years combined. The terms had been contested point by point, clause by clause, with the careful and exhausting thoroughness of a governing body that knew it was losing ground and was determined to at least control the exact shape of the loss. We had not given on any of the 5 primary terms. We had given on timing and on process. The stellar side weapon program would be dismantled over 18 months rather than immediately, under joint inspection rather than unilateral demand, because the engineers who had to do the dismantling needed time, and the inspection framework needed structure. The public acknowledgement of what had been done to humanity, and to Vareth 4, and to the Orath culture, would be released in a phased process that allowed the Council's member species to manage the political impact on their own populations, because I was not interested in causing mass civil unrest across 31 worlds, and I was also not interested in giving anyone a reason to claim that we had destabilized the galaxy for our own convenience. The territorial allocation would be surveyed and formally deeded within 6 months. The rest we held absolutely. The human seat on the Council was ratified on the 6th day. The delegation that cast the deciding vote was the Eloan Collective, the same species whose representative had filed a coerced dissenting note 4,000 years ago and had spent 4 millennia carrying the knowledge of what they had been made to do. Dava Wen, the Eloan senior delegate, came to find me after the vote was certified. She was a small individual, very precise in her movements, and she looked at me for a moment before she spoke. 4,000 years ago, she said, our representative was told that if we voted against the motion, the collective's trade access to core council systems would be suspended. We had 17 colonies that depended on that access for food import. He voted the way he was told to vote, and he spent the rest of his life unable to speak about it publicly. But he filed the dissenting note because he needed the record to know he had understood what was being done. I said nothing. I let her speak. We have been waiting for someone to find that note, she said, for a very long time. We found it, I said. She nodded once, precisely, and walked away. I thought about that moment a great deal in the days that followed. I thought about how many pieces of history are buried in records that no one has thought to look for, and how different things might be if the looking happened sooner. And then I thought about all the reasons the looking does not happen sooner, and I arrived at the conclusion that my grandfather had probably arrived at as well, which was that the looking only happens when someone decides that the discomfort of finding the truth is preferable to the comfort of not knowing it. We had made that decision for 31 civilizations. Whether they thanked us for it eventually was not my concern. The 3 species whose ships had attacked our fleet during the session faced a formal council censure and a suspension of their vote rights for a period of 10 years. That was the council's own process, not mine. I had submitted the documentation and stepped back from it, because it was more powerful for the council to discipline its own members than for us to demand punishment and be seen as the ones controlling the outcome. The Splinter Fleet commanders were returned to their homeworlds, as I had promised, without conditions. The Council's own tribunal would handle what came next for them. I was done with those 22 ships. I was done with a great many things. Now I was standing at the observation port, looking down at a world that was ours. The system had been called Heron's Reach in the old human expansion records, a name given by the survey team that had first catalogued it 4,060 years ago, before the vote, before the erasure, before everything. It had been in our expansion corridor, one of 12 systems we had been in the process of evaluating for settlement. After the erasure, the Threnian Collective had designated it as a resource extraction zone, and had spent 2,000 years pulling minerals from its asteroid belt before the deposits ran thin, and they moved on, leaving behind a network of abandoned industrial platforms and a second planet that their extraction operations had partially reshaped. The third planet in the system, which the old survey team had designated Heron 3 in the dry language of exploration cataloging, had been entirely untouched. It was habitable. It was rich. It had oceans and weather systems and soil chemistry that our biological teams had confirmed was not merely workable, but exceptional, the kind of planet that appeared in survey records with the notation recommended for priority settlement. Our terraforming teams had been working on it for 3 years, beginning well before the negotiations, because I had planned for the outcome we wanted, and not for the outcome we feared. They had done extraordinary work. The atmospheric adjustments were complete. The soil seeding was done. The first surface structures were built. It was called New Terra, not as a replacement for Earth, as a continuation of it. I looked at it for a long time. Behind me, the bridge crew was running routine status checks. The fleet was dispersed now, spread across the system and the surrounding space, in the pattern of a civilization beginning to settle, rather than a military force holding position. Ships were moving toward New Terra with the first construction materials, the first permanent colonists, the families who had lived their whole lives on ark ships and who would be the first human beings to stand on solid ground under an open sky in 4,000 years. Nora came to stand beside me. She had always had good instincts for when to approach and when to leave a silence alone. "The first landing shuttles are loaded," she said. "Captain Drummond is leading the first group herself. She asked if you wanted to go with them." I thought about that. I thought about Elise Drummond, who had been born on the 7th Ark ship, and who had commanded it with such quiet authority for 2 decades, and who deserved to be among the first people to step onto that soil as much as anyone in the fleet. "Tell her to go," I said. "Tell her I will be down on the 2nd day." Nora nodded. I kept looking at the planet. Somewhere below me, in a few hours, human beings were going to walk on Earth again. Not the same Earth. Not the original Earth, which was gone, which was a system of debris and cold silence now, 4,000 years dead. But Earth, in the original sense of the word. Ground, soil. A place to stand that was theirs. I thought about the first people to go down. I thought about what it would feel like to step out of a shuttle and put your foot on ground that had never been walked on by any human before, and to know that every human after you would remember you as the first. I thought about my grandfather, who had died 300 years ago on an ark ship with no planet within reach, and who had made me promise, through 300 years of recorded instructions and inherited obligation, that I would not let the anger consume the purpose. I thought about Dava Wen and her careful, precise posture, and the 4,000 years her civilization had spent knowing what it had been made to do. I thought about the 31 vote statements in a sealed record, and the 2 that had been different from all the others. I thought about the council chamber, and the empty chair I had moved a stand away from, and how it had felt to sit in it not as a petitioner, or a prisoner, or an extinct entry in a registry, but as the representative of 14 billion living human beings who had never, not once in 4,000 years, stopped being exactly that. Then I pressed the communications channel. "This is Admiral Cale Voss, speaking to all fleet channels, all ark ships, all vessels currently in the Heron system. I have a brief thing I want to say before the first landing crews deploy." The channel was quiet. All across the fleet, in ships and corridors and common rooms and preparation bays, I knew people were stopping what they were doing and listening. 4,000 years ago, I said, our people were given 4 lines in a registry, the date of our erasure, a vote count, and a reason, a single bureaucratic phrase that was meant to sum up everything we were and everything we would ever be, and to close the matter permanently. I paused. They did not know us very well. Another pause. What you are doing today, what every one of you has done by being here, by surviving, by building, by training, by carrying this forward through every generation that came before us. On those ark ships, and those dead moons, and in those cold and silent decades, is not revenge. Revenge would have looked like destruction. What we did was something harder. We came back. We stood at their table. We made them read their own record. We made them answer for it. And then we took back what was ours and we started again. I looked at New Terra one more time. My grandfather said something to me in a recording he made 300 years before I was born. He said, "Remember why we survived. We survived because we were human. Hold on to that." I have thought about those words a great deal, and I think what he meant was this. We survived because we are the kind of species that, when given 4 lines in an extinction registry, responds by filling 4,000 years with everything those 4 lines tried to erase. We survive because we remember. We build because we believe the future is worth building. We come back because we have never once, in all the long history of this species, decided that being gone was the same thing as being finished. I closed my eyes for one moment. "Welcome home," I said. "All of you. Every last one of you. Welcome home." I closed the channel. Below me, New Terra turned slowly in the light of a sun that had been waiting for us for 4,000 years, unaware, or perhaps simply patient, the way places are patient when they are ready for someone to arrive. The first shuttles began their descent. I watched until the last one was through the atmosphere and the comm system reported all surface contacts confirmed. Then I walked back to my chair and sat down and began reviewing the list of tasks that came after. There was a great deal of work left. There always was. The council seat needed a permanent representative. The inspection team for the Stellar Side Dismantlement Program needed to be formed. The territorial survey had to be staffed. The public record acknowledgement process needed human oversight to ensure it was carried out fully and not quietly minimized over time. 14 billion people needed a civilization, not just a planet. And I was the admiral. There was no one else to start the work. I pulled up the first file and began to read. The stars outside the window were the same stars they had always been, but something about the way I looked at them had shifted, permanently, in a way I did not yet have exact words for. They were not ours in the possessive sense, not territory to be claimed or catalogued. They were ours in the way that a horizon belongs to anyone standing at the edge of something large and open, looking forward. They were ours because we were still here to look at them. That was enough. That had always been enough. The registry, somewhere in the council's archives, now had a new entry where the old 4 lines had been. The human species, current status, present, population, 14 billion and growing, homeworld, New Terra, Heron system, coordinates attached, notes, see Council Record 7741 for prior history. See also, the complete public record of the session of acknowledgement, ratified by the full council, and available in all member species archives. And at the very end of the entry, in the field marked Historical Addendum, someone in the council administrative office had added a single line that I suspected had come from Dava Wen, though I never confirmed it. It said, "Never again listed as extinct." I read that line 3 times. Then I put the file down and looked out at the stars for a few more minutes, and I let myself feel, just for those few minutes, what 4,000 years of patience finally arriving at its purpose actually felt like. It felt very quiet. It felt very right. Then I picked up the next file, and the work continued.